Hi, this is Carrie with Carrie Concealed and the Active Self-Protection Extra channel. And today, this is going to be part one of a good friend's guide to a great range experience.
POM pepper spray is next generation OC spray. It's hot at 1.4% major capsaicinoids, and its modular design means you can customize it exactly to you. 3 different setups, lots of different color combinations. You can make it exactly as you like. And the flip top safety prevents accidental discharges. It's 10 to 12 foot range and 25 half-second blasts. Make sure that you can keep that long range eye poke at long range. I trust POM OC and I recommend it for everyone for self-defense.
A good friend's guide to a great range experience. Why is a great range experience important? I always like to start, or in my head at least, think about the why. And I think the reason why it's so important is because a number of reasons. I was in a class a number of years ago with Masada Ayub was teaching it, and he asked, I can't remember exactly how he asked the question, but the question was, I think he asked how many of you are instructors, or something like that. And not very many people raised their hand. And then he said, well, you all need to raise your hand, because if you own a firearm and if you are taking this topic seriously, which you are because you're here at this class learning the legal side or the moral principles of self-defense as well, then you're going to have people asking you to take them to the range. And that's true. I find my students will often tell me, oh, my friend heard that I was taking a class with you and she wants me to take her to the range now, or he wants me to take him to the range now. So I think because all of us have, especially if you're watching this channel, you probably have people ask you to take them to the range. Or when you're at the range, someone asks you for help. I think another reason to me personally why it's important is I've been teaching long enough and I've had enough students tell me almost as a sign of like they're proud of it. And it'll come out something like, well, before I would marry my husband, I told him that he had to get all the guns out of the house. And the first time somebody said that to me, I said, and he married you? I meant to say it in my head, but it came out my mouth. I understand that if somebody doesn't understand about firearms and how to store them safely and that sort of thing, it can be scary. But there's got to be a way we can figure out how to do it together, right? And to store them safely. So anyway, so I think if we're going to keep our Second Amendment rights and our ability to protect ourselves, I think it's going to be because we have more and more families get involved in shooting and the shooting sports. And so we're talking about a good friend's guide to a great range experience so that we can make sure that anyone who comes to the range has a great experience there. So I want, anytime somebody comes to the range, I want it to be a positive, fun experience. I want them to want to come back. I don't want them to be scared while they're with me. I want to make sure that I think ahead and plan for those things and prepare them ahead of time for anything. I tried to put myself in my students' shoes and remember what it was like when I didn't know what I didn't know. I remember, this occasionally still happens, especially with expert witness work, but I remember not knowing how to know if a holster was good or not, or even what search term to type into Google to look up something about shooting that I wanted to learn. I remember not knowing who I could trust, who was a good source of information on the interwebs. And so I tried to put myself in my student shoes, and I like to ask them, how are you feeling about being at the range today? 1 is a root canal, and 10 is an all-expense-paid trip to anywhere you want to go. And it's fun when you give them that range, and they'll usually are very honest with us, and I do appreciate that. But their answer to that question gives me a lot of information about how they're feeling about the experience. For those of you that are instructors, one of the things I encourage all instructors to use is the free forms on Google. I send out pre-course surveys for all of my classes, and even when I do private instruction, I send a pre-course survey or a pre-instruction survey out to them. I also send post surveys as well. But one of the questions I ask them on the pre-course survey, especially for like my First Shots class, is how would you characterize your general feelings and emotions regarding learning to shoot? And these are the options they have. I can't wait. I'm a bit nervous. Neutral. I have lots of questions. I'm extremely nervous. And they're great about answering those questions for me. So one of the things that I think can make it challenging to ensure that we have a great time at the range, or that we offer people a great time at the range, is the curse of expertise. Especially when we're dealing with novices. We're talking about things that they have no experience with at all. I'd like to read you this quote from Dr. Yamane, David Yamane, who wrote Gun Curious. And in the book, he describes what it was like to fire a handgun for the first time as an adult male, 43 years old. And he says on page 11, nothing I'd seen on TV or in the movies prepared me for the shock of an explosion literally an arm's length from my face. His eyes instinctively closed, his ears rang from the gun's 160 decibels, and yes, he did have ear protection. 160 decibels apparently is more than 2 times louder than a jet engine on takeoff. He says guns, like everything, observe Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. The combustion that forced the projectile down the barrel, not the muzzle, at 1,250 feet per second, also drove the gun back toward him. I have a number of students that shot with someone before they come to a class with me. Let's say they're newer, and there was nothing that prepared them for the amount of felt recoil. They were so afraid they were going to drop the gun when they pressed the trigger. It was very scary for them. And there's ways that we can mitigate that as well as instructors. We'll talk about that too later. Dr. Yamane said he was able to absorb some recoil with his arms and his body, yet the muzzle still flew upwards by at least 45 degrees, giving the sense that the gun was going to fly out of his hands. And he says, anxiety prevented me from storing more memories of that precise moment, but I know I missed the target entirely. He said, even with all that, I still had fun and felt challenged. And I'm glad he had fun and felt challenged his first time at the range. That's awesome. That isn't always the case for people, especially when the experience is that shocking. One of the other things that I think makes shooting a little bit different, or having people at the range with us a little bit different than a cooking class, let's say, is Massad Ayoob says it best. He says that we're trying to verbally explain how to do something that is felt, or a felt sensation. And words often fail us when we're trying to describe that. It's like teaching somebody how to dribble a ball, or that's not a very good example, but sometimes things are just tough to explain verbally to people. So I think we're mindful of those things that can help us. So the curse of expertise. I used to say when I first started teaching that I never wanted to forget what it was like to not know. I never wanted to forget what it was like to, like I mentioned before, not know what to Google, not know who was a good source of information or trustworthy source of information. I wanted to never forget what it was like to not know the jargon and the different phrases that are used that just roll off instructors' tongues often. I remember, this is a long time ago, somebody talking about splits, and I could not even imagine what splits were. I didn't even own a timer at the time. This was like 15 years ago. And they were talking about their splits. And I just remember thinking, splits? Are we talking about like gymnastic splits or banana splits? And I remember what it was like to not know enough to be able to see similarities and differences between holsters, or understand them, or even between handguns, for example. The geese are having a good time out there on the lake. Sorry about that. So eventually it did happen, though. Eventually I found myself, my kids are the ones that would point it out to me. They'd say, hey, Mom, when you were teaching the multi-state permit class today, you said a couple phrases that I don't think people knew. And I'm thankful that they told me. But I want to avoid that as much as I can. So the greater the expertise, the less the expert thinks like a novice. And experts and novices, we don't process information the same. So my goal is to create an experience for my learners so they have a basic cognitive framework to hang their new learning off of. So I like to think of it as building a box. I'm building a box. I'm helping them build a box to put their learning in. And the box that I'm helping them build, it's kind of an empty box. It might be some stuff in there at first, but we're building the box together if they're a novice at this. This box and what's in it will translate to the application of self-protection. That's how I try to think of it. Anything I'm teaching them will apply to the topic of self-protection. And this learning box, I like to think of it as we're teaching principles. And principles are universal and applications are personal. So what principles am I trying to teach? And thinking about it as principles helps me plan a trip to the range, for example, what I'm going to do at the range with someone. So we'll keep adding to this box and figuring out different ways that we can help our learners organize the information that we know they need to be able to be, in this case, for this one principle is firearm safe handling and safe storage, but the other things that we'll be teaching them as well. So one exercise I like to use to begin to develop a framework for just the safe handling principles and a way to immediately add context, because that's what I want to do. As soon as possible, I want to add context to what it is that they're doing, because context is everything. So I call it cooking and have a cooking convo with Carrie. So a cooking conversation. So I like to use this just to teach positive muzzle control and just muzzle awareness. So I take a GSO, gun-shaped object, whatever it is, and I first like to talk with the students about, I understand that I'm having to give them confidence. I'm loaning them my confidence at first until they develop competence. And then once they have competence, then they'll have a righteous confidence in what they're doing. And that confidence they have will be because of their competence. But at first, even though we're just using GSOs, or not real guns or anything, I'm still loaning them my confidence as they're getting started. So I like to ask them, are you able to touch your nose without, looking in the mirror and using your finger? And they'll say, yeah. Are you able to touch your belly button? Yeah. Are you able to touch your foot? Yeah, of course. Well, we've been pointing for a long time, and isn't it kind of cool that we know where this is pointed without even having to look at it? And that's one thing that helps us with safe firearm handling. And sometimes they'll look a little confused, but I then like to let them know, hey, we're going to learn how to hold this GSO, this gun-shaped object. And there's just 3 things that we need to focus on. We need to focus on the thumb crotch, which is right here, our flip-off finger, which is right here, and home. So what are those? Well, the thumb crotch, I want my thumb crotch to be as high in this back strap or this back part of the grip as possible. So my thumb crotch is here. I don't want my thumb crotch down here. I want it to be as high as possible here. Not like that. That would be uncomfortable. And then on this GSO, it would look like that. So I want my thumb crotch to be as high in the back strap as possible, and I want my flip-off finger to make contact with the bottom of the trigger guard. This is the trigger guard right here, and I want my flip-off finger to make contact with the bottom of that. So thumb crotch high, my flip-off finger making contact with the bottom of the trigger guard, and then my index finger, that needs to be at home. And I like to have a little inward bend on that instead of it flat. I like a little inward bend, and I'll talk about why that is later. And so I'll say, so let's pick this up together. And then the student will come up and I'll show them just to lift the back of it a little bit, and then thumb crotch high in the back strap, flip off finger making contact with the bottom of the trigger guard, and index finger at home. And then we just talk about, let's pretend that we're standing at the, I'd be out of frame if I stand up, but anyway, so if we're in a shooting stall or something, I'll say, let's pretend that we're gonna stand up and we're gonna cook some soup. So we're stirring hot soup on the stove, or hot hoop, as one of my kids used to call it. So we're stirring hot soup. And while I'm stirring the soup, am I able to turn around and look and still keep this gun pointed that in a direction that I know where it is pointed? Even if I turn it this way, I'm aware, because my finger's letting my index finger, I've been pointing at things, lets me know that it's in a different spot. But I can look down, up and around, and still know where this muzzle's pointed. And then I usually will start adding constraints. And I'll say, now let's pretend that this is an actual gun. It's not, but let's pretend for a minute that it is. And with an actual gun, I would want to make sure that this muzzle stays pointed towards something that would stop a bullet from this caliber of handgun. So I'll ask them, what are some things that you can think of in your house that would stop a bullet? And that begins a great conversation. Or I'll say, what are some things around here in the range that could stop a bullet? And that begins to open their thinking. What would stop a bullet? And that just introduces the concept of direction of least consequence. And we can go into it a little bit more than if they want to, but we also don't have to. We're holding on to a GSO. I'm not having to cover all of the information they need right now. Remember, I'm helping to, instead of me taking out everything in this box, in my boxes here, that's nicely organized, instead of me taking everything out in there and dumping it in their box, so there's no organization and I'm overwhelming them with information, rather than doing that, my job is to help them construct a box first, and then give them information, allow them to discover information, and then that allows them a framework to put that new learning on. So I'm not telling them what will stop a bullet, but we're having a discussion about that, which is nice. So let's say that they decide that in their house they have a brick fireplace that goes from floor to ceiling, and that would stop a bullet. And I agree with them that that would. We might talk about that 9mm bullets can travel through construction material very easily, but a brick fireplace or a basement wall would be a great direction of least consequence to have the firearm pointed in. So if I'm here cooking hot soup, and I'm at the stove stirring and cooking, and my fireplace, let's say it's that direction, as long as I keep this pointed in that direction, I know that it's in a direction that's going to stop the bullet. And then I'll set the gun down and I'll ask, so how do we pick this gun up again? Do we pick this gun up with like this, a claw grip? Or do we always want to pick the gun up like we're going to shoot it? What do you think would be the safest way, I'll ask them, or the most advantageous way to do it? And they very quickly on their own get there. I think it'd be best to pick it up like I was going to shoot it so that I would keep everything away from that trigger. And if they don't get there on their own, I might tell them about the Mile High Distillery, and we talked about it a couple of videos ago, but where the FBI agent was showing off the dance moves he learned at Quantico, did a backflip on the dance floor, his firearm fell out of his holster, which obviously it wasn't a hat holster, it didn't hold the firearm securely, that's for sure. And when everything was fine, the gun did what it was supposed to do, nothing when it hit the ground. The problem was when he went to pick it up, he got his finger in the trigger guard and depressed the trigger and ended up shooting someone in the leg. But I like to help them begin thinking about different ways to pick things up instead of giving them the answer, the only way we do this is this way. I like to let them think through some of those things. And that takes trust. We have to trust our learners. But we also have to trust ourselves as teachers. We have to trust that we know what information they need to be as safe as possible. And if we haven't taken the time to do that, then it can lead to distrust on our part. We might not trust ourselves, which then looks like we don't trust our learners. So I like to think of what are the KPIs, what are the key performance indicators of a good grip. And to me, picking the gun up with the primary hand would be the thumb crotch and flip off finger, that proprioceptive index here, thumb, and then your index finger at home. So key performance indicators, that's what I like to think of with each principle that I'm working on. So does it take a long time to do that? No, it doesn't take a long time to do that. It can be done very quickly, not rushed, but very quickly. But just think of all the different things that they are being exposed to and developing a framework for. It doesn't mean I'm going to leave them there. No, that's not even going to be the only thing we do at the range that day. There will be other things, but that's just an example of how I like to approach it. So in this example, they learned how to hold a pistol. They learned how to pick it up properly. They learned positive muzzle awareness and control, and they started to understand the direction of least consequence and what that applies. We know what constitutes a direction of least consequence and what doesn't. And that gives them an initial framework that we can now, as we continue on through our day, continue adding more and more things to the framework that they're building. So in the link, or in the description, there will be links to a couple of pre-course surveys that I use. Not that you have to use those, but if you just were wondering what they look like, I will send those out. Those will be in the description for you. And then I look forward to seeing you next week for part 2 of this Good Friends Guide to a Great Range Experience. Thanks for being here.